Alright people, this is Pray Love, and I'm back for another video. And this one is about, um, it's a bit of an homage to the barbershops and green fragrances of the 80's, the powerhouse fragrances of the 80's. I feel that as a younger individual myself, I should be talking about it a bit more because mostly people who are talking about the 80's powerhouse fragrances are older guys and yeah, I'm a younger guy in his 20s, late 20s, so perhaps I can um, explain why it's still relevant for people today to get those fragrances. And the main reason is because you like a fragrance, and that is the ultimate goal in the end, buying fragrances that you like. So I'm doing like a top five fragrance, and I'm going to reveal to you which one I actually bought. Well, the first one I'm going to talk about is Drakkar Noir, and this is because I actually had bought Drakkar Noir and haven't got it anymore, so it's pretty much out of the list, because I I didn't buy it. That's pretty simple. But in fact, I had it, but now I don't. I did a trade off. I think I don't remember exactly, but something in the veins of a trade off. And this one is a pretty good fragrance. It's a barbershop style, a very recognizable barbasol, very like shaving cream style fragrance. Um, it looks very cheap. It's very affordable, very easy to find in discounters everywhere, and it's an like airy chest, leather kind of fragrance, especially in the dry down. The dry down on this one is magnificent. It's a soapy, clean fragrance with that darker edge to it in the dry down that makes it very interesting to wear. Is it wearable nowadays? I mean, it's pretty dated because it's Drakkar Noir, and it probably was the most popular in its time. But I think it's decently wearable today. It's an kind of easy to wear fragrance in fact, because it's pretty soapy, so it's like you just smell very clean. You smell like you have a good hygiene. If you have a good hygiene, you'll smell very good with that fragrance, in fact. And it smells like shaving products. It's very like masculine in the most classical way possible. Uh, like the 80's powerhouse fragrance. It's the 80's powerhouse fragrance. Um, and yeah, it got released a bit after the other fragrances I'm going to talk about. But this one is very one of the quintessential ones. Get your nose on it. If you're like me and you like fragrances a lot, you must get your nose on it. Mostly the reason why I didn't go for it that much was because I thought it lacked some elements that I preferred in other fragrances that I'm going to talk about. Um, it has those elements, but it's not as crystal clear as the other ones. I'm going to talk about it later on. Afterwards, I can talk about Azzaro Chrome. No, I'm sorry, Azzaro Porom. And the reason why I said the first one is because it's probably the most popular one right now from this brand, but it's not the ultimate one. It's not the biggest one history wise. So Azzaro pour Homme is one of the biggest names on the market in fragrances. It is very there's a lot of like I think it's cedarwood, pine. It's very like it smells a bit like a forest. It's very dense and very woodsy. It has the other elements of like leather-ish, whatever, perhaps tobacco, perhaps leather, kind of essence to the powerhouse fragrances of the 80's, which we all love. And it's also gentlemanly, soapy clean, also, So at that time, it's a bit like, with Versace Eros, the thing was to get something very sweet, and spicy and whatever, and mix it with something very fresh. At that time, the Drakkar Noir and Azzaro and all of the other that I will mention had this idea of putting together the soapy, clean, but also the leathery, tobacco, dirtier notes together and formed the Powerhouse Fragrances. So these two first one are exactly like an image of that. Now also, like a thing to consider is that they all last a long time and they project pretty well. And even today, they are all very cheap to find in general, but they project a lot. Azzaro pour Homme, I thought was the most boring of the bunch. On in my opinion, maybe it's gonna change with time, but for now it's like the one that I was like, yeah, it smells like basically all the other ones, but no real distinctive factor to it. I think the Drakkar Noir was really like the emphasis on the shaving product kind of, which they all have, but this one was really more into it, a bit more of a fresh blast in the beginning. Azzaro Porum, I there was nothing that much to say about it. And afterwards, I'm going to talk about Polo Green. People say it's the real name is Polo by Ralph Lauren, but it's Polo Green for most people because the bottle is green. They're all pretty green type of fragrances, but the last three one are really green. You know, the bottle is the liquid is green. Everything is green about it. And Polo Green or Polo by Ralph Lauren is probably the most expensive of the bunch today. Probably because Ralph Lauren is still maybe going strong with it. I don't know, like reissuing it. It's a bigger company. There's Ralph Lauren and Azzaro are still like producing tons of fragrances nowadays, and perhaps Ralph Lauren it's more in their their niche of people that are buying it. It's like they probably still buy Polo by Ralph Lauren, Polo Green, and I think that this fragrance is a bit more like it's a bit more difficult to wear. In fact, it's probably the most popular right now out of the bunch, but I'm just gonna smell it back a bit. It's really very herbal, very like woodsy and stuff, and also like this thing with the woodsy notes, the pine trees, the coniferous notes. It's very dense. It smells like you're in the middle of the forest, but it's very coniferous. Very good for winter time because it's pretty dense. The opening is very strong, I remember. And there's the oak moss. And this is the point I wanted to make with this video. I really like the oak moss notes in all of these fragrances. I think they all have it. I'm not sure about Azzaro pour Homme. I think it's the least um, oak moss oriented one out of the bunch. Drakkar Noir too. And it's the fact that the oak moss is a bit lacking in my opinion in Drakkar Noir was perhaps the reason I departed from it because I love the oak moss scent so much. I think it's amazing. And in Polo Green, it's very much an oak moss, like it's centered around oak moss. It's very interesting. And it does smell even more like a forest because the oak moss is in the forest. It's just on the trees. It's that moss that grows on the trees and has that scent to it that you will find in forests. And I think this one is amazing. It's a classic. Uh, the oak moss is a classic 80's powerhouse thing. It's a very potent scent. It's challenging a bit. It has this almost animalic feel to it, but it's wonderful. In the Polo Green, it's wonderfully done. It's an amazing scent. Um, afterwards, I wanted to talk about Paco Rabanne pour Homme. And I know that Paco Rabanne has passed away recently. Um, and this is probably the biggest company right now producing fragrances because of the 1 million line, the Invictus line. Um, but no one really talks about Paco Rabanne pour Homme anymore. Uh, and it's pretty justified because it smells like the other fragrances I'm talking about right now. It's pretty dated, but the fact is, I think that the crowd for Ralph Lauren really still likes Polo Green, but the crowd for Paco Rabanne don't care about Paco Rabanne pour Homme. You know, they like the sweeter fragrances that were released by the brand and not really this old gem from the 70s, because I think it's a 77 fragrance and it's got used so much in the 80's. It's very classy, a bit like Polo Green. They're very comparable. Um, yeah, they're very similar in a lot of ways, okay? Because they're dense, they're coniferous, they smell like forests. I think that Paco Rabanne Pour Homme is a bit easier to wear than Polo by Ralph Lauren, but to my nose, it's got a bit of a sweeter side to it. It's got something interesting going on in that particular thing it's doing. It's a bit cheaper though, the bottle and everything, the design. You Google it, you know what I mean. It's not exactly like the bottles we're used to today, and the Polo bottle by Ralph Lauren is amazing. It looks so good. So yeah, sometimes between the two, if you want to choose for the bottle, you're gonna go for Polo Green. But Paco Rabanne, I think it's a better scent, but it's very in the same direction as Polo Green. It's just a bit less harsh. I think it's a bit more well done. And the last one is Quorum. Quorum was another of those. It's like Drakkar Noir by Guy Laroche and like Quorum by Puig. It's they don't make a lot of fragrances anymore. But Quorum was actually a very popular fragrance back in the days, perhaps less than all of the others stated. But today it goes for ridiculously low prices. Okay, it's a $15 fragrance, $20 fragrance tops. It's very, very affordable, and the quality is still as good as the other fragrances, and it outperforms a lot of fragrances on the market. It smells, I think it's like a bit of the in between line between Drakkar Noir and Paco Rabanne Pour Homme. There's this. They all have like this oak musting going on, the carnation flower, the kind of floral that was in a lot of 80's powerhouses and a lot of male fragrance in the 80's. They have also the coniferous side, the oak moss, the leather, the tobacco. So everything is kind of like a bit of the same as all the other fragrances, but I think the polar things in fragrances in this are Drakkar Noir and the Paco Rabanne Pour Homme. Paco Rabanne Pour Homme being the more coniferous, forest type fragrance, and Drakkar Noir being a lot more barbershop. Both are barbershop, both are coniferous and have oak moss, but it's like this spectrum. And I think that Quorum is kind of like the middle ground. It's a bit more challenging than Paco Rabanne Pour Homme. It smells very dated, like for today's standards. But I think that when you take those fragrances and you bring them back to a younger individual like me, it gets a whole new meaning to it. Uh, and perhaps people in the 80's knew like this scent on other guys from the 80's, and are like, whoa, this is weird. Or maybe some people know their grandfather were wearing that fragrance or whatever, but it kind of just gets another like meaning when you're wearing it in a totally different setting, in a totally different world. being a total different individual than back then. And I think that a lot of people know Polo Green or they know Drakkar Noir, and when they smell it, they're like, reminds me exactly of something, you know. But Quorum and Paco Rabanne pour Homme, even that one was, yeah, pretty popular. But Quorum and even Azzaro pour Homme, you know, people don't really remember those fragrances, and it gets relevant when you wear them yourself because you love the oak moss, you love where it's going, then you're gonna love it. And I'm going to reveal the one I got. I think it's pretty obvious from what I've been saying, but it's Quorum. And I actually got it from a trade, so even though it's dirty cheap, I just traded it with another dirty cheap fragrance. And I've got the aftershave with it. But and I'm wearing it right now, and this is, you know, this is an 80's powerhouse. You know, what else to say? It's very oak mossy. You can see like the green brown thing that it is. Very special, you know, a time capsule, and it has that aftershave vibe, that barbershop vibe that I really like in Drakkar Noir, but also has the oak moss blast and the forest kind of vibe, especially, yeah, when it dries, the oak moss becomes more apparent. There's leather that comes through. It's a superb fragrance, and there's tobacco too, but not the same type of tobacco as like tobacco vanille. It's like a leafier, drier tobacco, and it's not very smoky too. And these fragrances, they're not very sweet. They're very like absolutely not on the sweeter side. Um, at that time, it was woodsy, dry, and warm. You know, very warm. That was what they went for at that time a lot. So thanks for listening. I hope that you have, just like me, some passion like that. Perhaps for fragrances, perhaps for something else. I really like fragrances in general, and when you get into the old ones and the new ones, everything is. It's always fun to discover, and every new generation of fragrances brings something new. Some things get lost, like Quorum and Drakkar Noir, but uh, some things reappear over the time. Like in Sauvage Elixir, there's a bit of Drakkar Noir, there's a bit of Quorum, there's a bit of those powerhouse fragrances from the 80's, and this is a massively successful fragrance nowadays. Anyway, spread love and spray love. Bye bye.